Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to Famous and Gravy early and ad-free now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
This is Famous and Gravy, biographies from a different point of view. To participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. Now here's the quiz to reveal today's dead celebrity.
This person died 2023, age 70. A turning point in his career came shortly after a disappointing and unsuccessful audition for Saturday Night Live in 1980.
Chevy Chase.
Not.
He's still with us.
Still with us. Months before he died, it was reported that he was working on a memoir and a documentary. He said, quote, "Today it seems to me it's a lot more difficult to stand out. If you want to be weird, good luck."
Somebody weird who died in 2023. I mean, Weird Al is still with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to report that as of this recording, Weird Al Yankovic is still with us. He had scores of acting credits in a career that began in the 1960s, including roles on Murphy Brown, The Blacklist, and many other television series, and in movies like Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Burt Reynolds.
Not Burt Reynolds, who was not in any of those things. But yeah, no, Burt Reynolds and Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a movie I would see, though. He was in a feature film directed by Tim Burton in 1985, after which he created a popular Saturday morning kids series.
Pee-wee Herman.
Real name, please?
It's Paul Reubens. It was Paul Reubens. Oh, that's so embarrassing.
Today's dead celebrity is Paul Reubens, also known as Pee-wee Herman.
Whatever I was interested in, I would always think to myself, don't question what that is. Like, don't go like, is this something I should be spending my time on? Even if it was something really weird or abstract and I couldn't figure out what the connection to it was. And so whatever I would be interested in, I felt I had this kind of calm sort of thing within myself of just going, it's going to be revealed what you're doing and what you're supposed to do with all this stuff in your brain. You're going to know what it is at the right time. And luckily for me, that's exactly what happened with Pee-wee Herman.
Welcome to Famous and Gravy. I'm Michael Osborne.
And I'm Amit Kapoor.
And on this show, we choose a famous figure who died in the 21st century and present a new narrative. Most biographies focus on legacies and accomplishments, but we are interested in the journey, the process, the experiences. What didn't we know? What could we not see clearly? And what does a celebrity's life story teach us about ourselves? Today, Paul Reubens, also known as Pee-wee Herman, died 2023, age 70.
Let me just say I'm glad our word of the day is not category, because we would be screaming. We would be screaming quite a bit throughout the next 1 hour.
I think we should make it word of the day category. All right. Category 1, grading the first line of their obituary. Paul Reubens, the comic actor whose bow-tied, childlike alter ego, Pee-wee Herman, became an unlikely, if almost uncategorizable, movie and television sensation in the 1980s, died on Sunday in Los Angeles. He was 70. What stood out to you, Amit?
So one, comic actor. I like that they led with that, how Paul was actually a comic actor and was not actually Pee-wee.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge distinction to make that is not as obvious as we think.
Yeah.
I want to talk about alter ego. I like that. That's a very apt description. And then the words I really like, I like unlikely and uncategorizable and sensation. If the obituary were just unlikely, uncategorizable sensation, I'm happy.
I agree with all of that. Let's start with the alter ego thing. I mean, what do you understand an alter ego to be?
It's a good question. I mean, without a dictionary definition, it's basically you pretending to be somebody else. But it's that somebody else becomes so big that they are actually larger than you. I tried to find like world's most famous alter egos. So I think Pee-wee liked to use Elvira as his best comparison because they in fact knew each other.
Yeah, they came up together in Groundlings.
But Time Magazine did have an article in 2009 of their favorite alter egos. And they put number 1 Sacha Baron Cohen for Bruno and Borat, obviously very timely. And Andy Kaufman, who had a few.
Yeah.
The Beatles, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, they consider an alter ego. Eminem's Slim Shady. And then what I really liked that they did was Stephen Colbert as Stephen Colbert.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
The alter ego as himself.
So all of these are interesting examples. None of them are quite at the level that Paul Reubens and Pee-wee Herman are, in the sense he played the part in the movie and in the TV show, but also off camera for many years. So much so that Pee-wee Herman is probably more famous than Paul Reubens.
Oh, not even probably.
Right. And so with any of those other examples, is that true?
Yeah. Only in the non-listed one of Elvira.
Right. And I guess that's what I want to draw attention to, is that what Paul Reubens did with Pee-wee Herman is just so unusual. It's unlike any other story I can possibly think of. And like you, I was really racking my brain for who else pulled off this trick. This is all very accurate. Comic actor, bow-tied, childlike alter ego. That is a perfect description of Pee-wee Herman. Yes. Unlikely, if almost uncategorizable, movie and TV sensation. That is perfect. I have a little bit of a problem with became a sensation in the 1980s, and then they just kind of leave it there. I mean, certainly that is the peak of his fame and importance, but there is a kind of cult-like interest in Pee-wee Herman, and it almost makes it sound like it's a one-hit wonder to me.
No, correct. He was revered for a long time.
Right.
He was a revered Paul.
Yeah, he was a revered Paul. Well said. So the two issues I take with this obituary are, one, that it feels a little limited in terms of legacy, and then alter ego, I guess, is probably the best way of capturing the character was more famous than he was. But yeah. I think that there's another way of saying whose character Pee-wee Herman, transcended its creator. Alter ego transcended its creator, or something like that. That doesn't quite get the story.
The enormity of the alter ego.
Totally. And the accomplishment of it. Like, wait, is it Paul or is it Pee-wee? Do we even really know?
I've got no problem with alter ego. That's how he described it himself. I see what you're saying on the level of transcendence, how it's above and beyond some of these other alter egos, but I'm at peace with it.
So I actually have my score.
Let's hear it.
I have an 8 out of 10.
You have an 8 out of 10.
I think it's very good, but because it falls short in terms of hinting at a more interesting story, I'm a little disappointed. So what's your score? I'm
going to go a 9. So the only flaw I see, I didn't even fully see it before until you pointed it out, was the lack of timeline, the extension of the appeal of both the man and the character.
Shall we move on?
Yes.
Category 2, 5 things I love about you. Here, Amit and I develop a list of 5 things that offer a different angle on who this person was and how they lived. All right, number 1, this is pretty obvious, but I think it's so important it has to be called out. Permission structure for weirdness.
Yes.
That, more than anything else, like the legacy of Paul Reubens and Pee-wee Herman is the message. It is okay to be weird. It is okay to be different. It is okay to be a nerd. It is okay to defy norms and to defy expectations and to indulge in idiosyncrasies. He created room for all of us to be a bunch of weirdos and to love weirdos.
Today's secret word is door. No, you all know what to do whenever we hear the secret word, right? Scream. That's right. For the rest of the day, whenever anybody says a secret word, scream real loud.
One thing I love about Pee-wee's Playhouse, which I have been rewatching with my kids, and oh my God, does it hold up, is what a pastiche of inspiration it is. It's
pastiche?
I think that's our montage.
No, I just don't know what pastiche means.
Well, I hope I'm using the word right. Grabbing from a lot of little places. There's Rocky and Bullwinkle and I Love Lucy and old Disney, and these, cobbling together all these weird sources of inspiration. And it all adds up to something very original. I like to think our show can do this at times. You and I draw a lot of inspiration from a lot of different podcasts. And then this is kind of what I was hinting at a second ago. The whole story is just so atypical. It is really closer to almost like a musician or a rock star. I wrote he created his own platform, and that sounds so Silicon Valley and corny, but he created Pee-wee in a theater in the Groundlings, and then the
Groundlings you should define as a LA-based improv comedy.
Improv troupe, right. And a lot of SNL cast members have come out of it. It's got a long storied history, sort of like Second City. So he creates the character in the Groundlings, manages to make it onto Letterman, then gets the HBO special, then gets the movie, then gets the TV show. Like, all of this was just bootstrapped in this unusual way, and it's all because he commits to this one character. So I guess what I'm linking here is the weirdness of the character and Pee-wee's Playhouse and his interests and his idiosyncrasies, but also entertainment as performance art. There is no comparison to what Pee-wee Herman is and was.
That's why I really liked the word unlikely in the obituary, because it speaks to that story. And just to add a few years to what you just said, like the Groundlings and the creation of the character was in the 70s. Then he started doing Letterman and got the HBO special around 81. The movie came in 85, and then the Playhouse was 86 to 91. So you've got, 16 plus years of full commitment to this character. Really, part of the reason for the sensation was because he got cut from the SNL auditions.
Yes, I want to talk about that more later, yeah.
Without that, there might not have even been this. But I love your point, and I've detracted from it.
Well, not really. I think you added to it, and thanks for outlining the story. We talked about this in Johnny Cash. You had Johnny Cash, one of the things you loved was Town Crier. I hadn't thought about that before, but there is permission structured. Johnny Cash represents this very masculine Western man, and he's crying all the time. In every other song, there's nothing but tears. Great artists expand possibilities for us. More than anything, Paul Reubens as Pee-wee Herman made a lot of niche interests okay in a way that is such a gift and such a value add to society and to, the history of entertainment.
Jerry, stop it! Jerry!
Hey, Pee-wee, do you know what time it is?
It's fun time! It's fun time!
That's right, Pee-wee. It's time to play with me.
Here we go! Connect the dots, la 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 la. Connect the dots, la 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 la.
Okay, what do you have for number 2?
Number 2, creator of Community.
Oh, I love it. Okay.
So this is specifically a Pee-wee's Playhouse reference.
Yeah.
So the origin of Pee-wee in the Playhouse, you don't really know. You kind of assumed he's this orphaned kid, but he created all of these characters to have this family around him constantly, right? And so to me, I love this because it speaks to the idea of belonging, connection, community, but to do it in atypical ways, not necessarily in a mom and dad and brother-sister type of structure. And so I did bother to go down and find all of the Pee-wee's Playhouse characters. So we had Tito, Miss Yvonne, Captain Carl, Cowboy Curtis, who I'm going to come back to, the King of Cartoons, Reba the Mail Lady, the Jambi the Genie, Terry the Pterodactyl, Conky the Robot, Randy the Marionette, and Globy the Globe, Mr. Window, Cherry, who was quite beloved, Flory, and Chandelier. All of these were characters that had actual voices and actually had a relationship with Pee-wee.
Yes.
Some of them were pure animations, such as the chair, and some were actually people like Larry Fishburne playing Cowboy Curtis or Phil Hartman playing Captain Carl.
Right.
So I love that he encouraged community in creative ways.
I saw a quote that said one constant of his life has been his abiding affection for the inanimate. I mean, half of the characters you describe here are, what do you call it? Anthropomorphizing or, creating, it's not
personified.
Personified, yeah, right. I mean, inanimate objects brought into characters. And so you're calling that what? Community what?
What did I say? Let's just call it creating community. Well, let me change that to creative community.
Oh, that's even better. Where I thought you were going to go was kind of the comedy traditions and creative community he exists in, like who his friends are. I mean, Phil Hartman's come up a few times. I knew those guys kind of knew each other. I didn't know that they were like friends.
Yeah, they were practically business partners leading up to the big adventurement.
Yeah, and when he was at Cal Arts, like, did you see this? David Hasselhoff was part of his cohort.
No, I missed that.
Yeah, I mean, well, and there's a lot of kind of weird pop culture touchstones. You know, he's in Blues Brothers. He hosted Saturday Night Live at one point. He and Conan would exchange texts. Like, he is in the comedy inner circle, but it's not just comedy. So
yeah, so it's he truly practiced what he preached.
Yeah, absolutely. Creative community. All right. And number 3, I wrote resilience. And this comes up in a few different places. He was rejected from Juilliard and Carnegie Mellon and wound up at Cal Arts, which is where he really found his people. You hinted at this. He suffered a lot of rejection before he found his way into acting circles and later into comedy circles. In 1981, it was 80 or 81, I think it was 1980, he's rejected from SNL.
The Pee-wee Herman show was 100% created out of spite for not getting Saturday Night Live, and terror and panic, because I really felt like I was in this kind of up-and-comer category at the time where I was being spotlighted in little sections of magazines and stuff, like a guy to watch out for kind of thing. Yeah. And I flew to New York to be one of the 22 finalists in the season that included Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy and those people. And on the plane, on the way back, I totally panicked. I thought, like, I'm going to go from up-and-comer to nothing. And I just thought, you better really do something about this and take control.
One thing I found really interesting was the way he and Phil Hartman had conversations where Phil Hartman was saying, don't only do this character, you have greater range, you're capable of more. Phil Hartman, became synonymous with range and with playing a range of comedic characters. And so that tension between the two of them is so interesting to me in terms of just nerdy comedy history. Yeah. And then the last thing under resilience, we'll get to it more later. If you really get into the story of post-scandal, post-1991 arrest and incident, he really gets to a deep place of surrendering and accepting. I know you and I are going to have to kind of tap dance around this topic, but in some ways that scandal is one of the most embarrassing possible things anybody could ever imagine for themselves.
Pee-wee Herman is played by actor Paul Reubens. Friday night, he went to a XXX theater in Sarasota and watched Nancy Nurse. Undercover agents say he exposed himself twice.
And while in the theater, in plain view, basically.
How do parents answer their children's questions about a Saturday morning hero being arrested for indecent exposure?
He talks about it when he finally gets into therapy around it as a therapist saying, you are in a state of shock. You know that? And he was absolutely in a state of shock and had to wake up and face the music and navigate fame and navigate humiliation for years and decades. And it never totally left him. Where he gets to it and how he describes his journey with handling that is astonishing. After researching it, I came away not just impressed, but like if I had high hopes that he would get to a good place for himself, he achieved that and then some. So yeah. I know resilience is kind of a corny term.
No, I like it. It's a very Michael term.
Yeah, I hope so. Look, it's on my mind a lot lately, man. You know, I sometimes wonder, am I ever going to just be okay? Am I ever just going to have a sense of like semi-stable security with who I am and where my life is going? And I love finding these examples of deep resilience from what I found extremely evident in the Paul Reubens story.
I love it. I want to add 2 pieces of data just because I found them fascinating.
Okay.
In your resilience examples. So being cut from SNL, he was cut for Gilbert Gottfried.
Yeah, right.
So I never knew that, and I found that fascinating. Then post the 1991 arrest for public indecency, he found refuge in the house of Doris Duke, who was a good friend of his. And this is Duke as in Duke University's daughter, the legacy of the tobacco fortune.
Right, billionaire who, I mean,
just so many just fascinating characters throughout this story of resilience. Okay, number 4, OGH. Original gangster hipster. So Pee-wee was fully old school, and not just Pee-wee, Paul. So he was a very old school vintage type of guy.
Yes.
So if you go back to the creation of the entire character and Pee-wee's Playhouse, the character himself dressed like this sort of vintage 40s, 50s looking, forget about the makeup and the hair and the androgyny, but just the actual costume. Everything was a throwback. It was very, very odd to have a non-animated Saturday morning series that was a kids program starring adults.
Yes.
I mean, like very analog, if you will, as opposed to like the digital cartooning that was happening. He was a collector of lots of vintage stuff. He said that he had to stop collecting in 1995 once eBay was launched because he would just end up buying everything.
Go crazy. Yeah. I mean, it really does sound like his house is not so different from the house we see in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Correct, which reminded me of Bismarcky a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Totally.
And then the one fact that I really liked is he created his own Christmas card. So every year and this is, from me, a family of printing business owners.
Indeed.
So he created his own Christmas card that was custom and designed and sent it out every year to his list of 4,000 people. So speak of creative community. But all these kind of like throwback, analog, hipsterish retro things were the mark of Paul Reubens and the mark of Pee-wee Herman.
Yeah.
I don't know if I need to explain why I like that, but I think it's pretty obvious in today's era that just the slow down aspect of an analog retro world, and I love it.
Well, okay, so I have a number 5. I wrote down object of academic study. So I went to Google Scholar and typed in Pee-wee's Playhouse and Pee-wee Herman and saw what kind of articles had gotten the most attention. Here are some of the titles I collected. Pee-wee Herman unmasks our cultural myths about masculinity. Pee-wee Herman and the postmodern picaresque. I had to look at what picaresque means. I still don't really understand it. Queer criticism and the sexual normativity, the case of Pee-wee Herman. There are scholars from a lot of different traditions in the humanities who are like, I have an argument to make, and I'm going to make it via Pee-wee Herman and Pee-wee's Playhouse. It's so open to interpretation in a very interesting way. This was my favorite quote. Bernard Welt, a professor of humanities at the Corcoran College of Art and Design, wrote that the series, this is Pee-wee's Playhouse, was the first popular television show to build self-consciously on the anti-traditions of installation and performance art, while boldly exploring the inherent qualities of televisual form itself. Reubens said, I don't even know what the second half of that means, or the first half, but it was performance art, which I think sort of sums it up. Like, I love how, I guess this goes back to the obituary thing. I just love what an anomaly this is as a story.
Yeah, the learning journey I've gone on in the lead up to this episode was much, much more vast than I would have expected.
Totally. I mean, I think Bowie is an interesting point of reference here. When we did the Bowie episode, I encountered 30, 40, 50 different biographies. I would like to see a flood of Paul Reubens biographies and deconstructing the Pee-wee story in the coming years.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good way to sum it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's summarize. So number 1, I said permission structure for weirdness. Number 2, you said
creative community.
Number 3, I said resilience. Number 4, you went with
original hipster old school.
Well said. And number 5, object of academic study. All right, let's take a break.
Michael, one thing that's very difficult about being a world famous podcaster is I just don't interact with very many people.
Can I offer a suggestion? Have you been to Half Price Books lately? I've been going there a lot lately for our show. The other day I said, hey, I'm looking for a biography of Burt Reynolds, Angela Lansbury, Leonard Cohen, Nora Ephron, and Gene Wilder. Can you help? And I found myself in the greatest conversation about the wide range of biographies that are out there and what makes for a good biography overall. You're going to have the kind of conversations you want to have and meet the kind of people you want to meet at Half Price Books. Do you know where to go?
I think I'm just going to check out the all-new hpb.com, where I can find my local store, plan my next trip, maybe even buy online to pick up in store, possibly create a wish list, and more.
I like it. Start on the internet, work your way to the store. Okay, category 3, One Love. In this category, Amit and I each choose one word or phrase that characterizes this person's loving relationships. Before we select our word or phrase, we review the family life data. This will go pretty fast, at least the data part. No marriages, no kids, other relevant info. I always leave a space for this in my notes. striking lack of info is what I have. There is very, very little information on Paul Reubens' interpersonal relationships and especially on his love life.
On his love life, yeah.
I do want to say this about the research journey. Okay, I try to respect boundaries, but for our show, I want to know boyfriends, girlfriends, loving relationships, and so forth. I started Googling around about Paul Reubens, and in places you will see people say words like, he never did come out as gay. And I'm like, oh, wait, was he gay? Did I not know this? Is this an open secret? There was a girlfriend, Debbie Mazar, who she's actually pretty famous. And
she was Shauna in
Goodfellas. Yeah, that's what
I wasn't thinking Goodfellas. She was in Entourage.
In Entourage,
but yeah,
right.
she was Ray Liotta's
She was in
girlfriend
Goodfellas, too.
Goodfellas.
And he kind of describes this deep love, although she then later says sort of a platonic relationship. So it is not clear at all. I reached out to some of my queer friends and gay friends and said, do I need to know something here that I just don't know? Because I'm not exactly finding it. And I do think Paul Reubens is something of a queer icon, and he never outed himself as queer or anything else. So we don't know anything really. And that was our starting point for coming up with one word. I have my phrase and I'm curious to hear yours, but I wanted to kind of lay that groundwork.
Yeah, I do want to add one thing is the family life of his own as a child.
Yeah.
So there would be a lot of assumptions with the creation of this weirdness that is Pee-wee Herman, that you had a strange childhood or a weird childhood. Yeah. He had a very, very loving relationship with his parents.
Yes.
They nurtured his creativity. There was no broken home, no signs of anything like that.
They supported him when he decided to go all in on Pee-wee Herman after the SNL rejection. They helped support him as he's putting that show together and investing in himself.
Yeah, and they invested in his creativity when he was younger, like letting him take circus classes and doing other things around the theater. He went on the Howdy Doody show to be in the pen or whatnot. So
right.
Really, really supportive parents and really kind of normalish household, which I didn't really expect to find.
Why don't you tell me your word or phrase?
My phrase is, I know you are, but what am I?
You're crazy.
I know you are, but what am I?
You're a nerd.
I know you are, but what am I?
You're an idiot.
I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I? Infinity.
I was going to use that later, maybe. Okay.
Really? Okay.
No, I wasn't.
So obviously that's a big Pee-wee quote, and this is just why pretend to know what we don't know. I'm using that phrase kind of tongue-in-cheek, but we don't know what Pee-wee was sexually. He could have been just completely asexual, and I don't think that that's impossible.
Well, there's one big data point against that, but to call him asexual doesn't seem quite
So what is a word for somebody who just doesn't necessarily have interest in romantic partners?
You want to hear my word?
Yeah.
I'm a loner, Daddy. A rebel.
Okay. Was that going to be your word or phrase?
It was. A loner.
Oh, so I just perfectly teed that up.
Yeah, you totally did. I really racked my brain with how would I characterize this? I like that this category forces us to overlay some kind of framing. He was ultimately alone. There's no life partner. He's also in a community of rebels. I mean, I think your thing about creative community, certainly that's very evident in Pee-wee's Playhouse. But it is...
Cherry was just off the chain
to start with. But I think the other artists of his generation and those of the generation before and after embrace him. You sometimes hear about stand-up comics having this kind of tribe. It's like that, except expanded out and on steroids. I think the musicians really admired him. I think the actors really admired him. I think the comedians, the late night hosts, like the way people love him and he's able to feel that love. I say a loner and a rebel, but actually to me looks like relational wealth. It's not solitude and desolation or even despair. Quite the opposite, right? I mean, he looks to me to be like a person in deep community in a way that's really heartwarming, but it is still a loner and a rebel.
Yeah.
Did I not elaborate enough, or did we not talk enough about your word or phrase? I know you are, but what am I? I mean, that kind of sounded to me like we only know so much, so let's not speculate.
Yeah, exactly. The guy did have a gift of being private, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, the whole smoking thing. So he was a pretty heavy smoker throughout all of the Playhouse, but he had basically John Singleton as his bouncer to make sure no one ever saw him smoke.
Totally. I love that John Singleton. I love that you got that in. That John Singleton hounded Larry Fishburne on the set of Pee-wee's Big Adventure so that Boys in the Hood could become possible.
Yeah. So maybe, and God bless you, Paul, if this is the case, maybe he just kept his relationships and sexuality just so immaculately private. I would find that hard to believe given how public his life became at certain times.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what's so interesting actually about the story beyond Pee-wee Herman is that it does seem like part of the reason he embraced the alter ego of Pee-wee Herman was as a coping mechanism for dealing with fame, that he saw it both as a pathway to fame and as a persona that he could hide behind. He would give interviews as Pee-wee Herman. He would make guest appearances as Pee-wee Herman. He never actually had to be Paul Reubens. In that way, he was able to protect his inner identity until this scandal. And even after that scandal, he did more or less still go down that pathway. And it opened up some doors, but closed a lot of others. There's a hard category for this figure. You know?
It is.
Yeah. But I love that we both chose quotes from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Okay. Shall we move on then?
Yes.
All right. Category 4, net worth. In this category, Ahmed and I will write down our numbers ahead of time. We will then look up the net worth number in real time, and the person closest to the actual net worth number will explain their reasoning. Finally, we will place this person on the Famous and Gravy net worth leaderboard. Ahmed Kapoor wrote down 11 million.
Michael Osborne wrote down 15 million.
Paul,
okay, we're pretty close.
I actually originally had 8 million. So it's funny that you landed at 11 because that's right. Paul Reubens' net worth, 5 million.
5 million. I was very tempted to go lower.
So, okay, this was a hard one to game out because there really is only one thing that made any money, and it's Pee-wee Herman. The movie was successful, the first movie.
Yeah, it was a $40 million box office based on a $2 million budget or something.
I tend to think overall there's more money to be made in TV in the 80s than in movies. Sort of have to build credibility as a bankable star before you get those really big paychecks. We learned that in the Patrick Swayze episode. So I kind of thought that, okay, if Pee-wee's Playhouse runs for 5 years on CBS, that's got to come with a pretty big windfall. But then there's more or less nothing substantial after the 1991 Indecent Exposure scandal.
Correct. There's a revival solo tour that was just in Los Angeles. There was the Judd Apatow movie that was made for Netflix in 2016. I don't think either of those came with a big payday.
There were acting roles. Blow, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Murphy Brown. He's not totally out of work. But every time he shows up, everybody's like, oh, it's Pee-wee. I mean, Paul Reubens, you know. So
the money makes sense. I mean, the Playhouse, which ran for 45 episodes, the budget for it, I'm not saying the revenue, the budget was $325,000 per episode. So that goes to about a $15 million budget. You can imagine at least 10% or so that went to Paul Reubens himself. Yeah. But that's still not that much money. You know, we're talking about $1 to $2 million over a course of 5 years. I thought there could be a lot of merchandising money that was coming his way.
There was for a time.
Yeah. And so I thought maybe he had that, plus being a loner, a rebel, he didn't have a lot of dependents. With the exception of his collections, there's not a lot of evidence that he lived lavishly. Yeah. So I thought it just might have been banked and accrued, and which is why I ended up at something like 11, but 5 makes perfect sense to me.
So where does this place Paul Reubens on the Famous and Gravy leaderboard?
So at 5 million, he is in a 4-way tie now for 65th place, which places him basically in the bottom 12% of Famous and Gravy episodes. Contemporaries include Yogi Berra and Fred Willard. He is just below Bob Einstein, who ended up at 6 million, and just above Nelson Mandela at 4 million. So I like that.
So there's comic greats and civil rights leaders and old baseball players down there at the bottom 12%.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on. Category 5, Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
They're the Little Lebowski Urban Achievers.
Yeah, the Achievers.
Yes, and proud we are of all of them.
In this category, we choose a trophy, an award, a cameo, an impersonation, or some other form of a hat tip. A lot of candidates here.
There were a whole bunch
of
cameos.
There's a ton of he's in that. Blues Brothers, Buffy the Vampire. What did you go with?
I'm going to lead with my favorite, Flight of the Navigator.
Oh, wow. I haven't seen this movie in decades.
This was huge. So he was the voice of the flying machine. The machine's name was Max. So he was the voice that led the navigator around. And I loved this movie.
I did too.
This came out probably just not too long after Big Adventure. And there was a few interesting things about this movie. One, it was one of Sarah Jessica Parker's first ever roles. It was one of the first movies to use CGI. If you remember that scene in which the steps appeared, it's a very memorable scene. So Paul Reubens was basically the key voice of this machine that went around the planet. Well, I guess I'll just come with the plot. There's this kind of alien life form that has realized that we only use 10% of our brains. And so they're on this interplanetary mission to basically collect specimens and figure out how to use more of our brains. And so that's the reason I love it, is that it just fits into this whole Pee-wee mysticism of like expanded creativity and so forth. But I also like that he kind of got this role to be a leader, to fly the plane around and to be a robot voice.
Will this hurt?
You will feel nothing.
Will I remember everything?
You will retain all data.
What if you fry my brain?
I will not fry your brain.
How do you know?
I have been programmed with superior intelligence.
That's it?
That's it, Davy.
Davy?
If you want to learn to swim, you've got to jump in the water.
Don't forget to feed Bruiser. 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Whoa!
Like I said, it's a big counter to this analog Pee-wee that we had. There's just a lot of contrasts. The other cool thing about this cameo is he actually didn't even bill himself on it, because this is pretty peak Pee-wee time. Mm-hmm. So he did, in the credits, it didn't even say Paul Reubens as the voice of Max. It said Paul Mall as the voice of Max.
Oh, really?
And part of the reason for that is I think Pee-wee, as you said, as a singular alter ego at the time, was too valuable. No one wanted to see or know Pee-wee outside of that. But I also thought it was just a really cool thing that he had this key role in this huge film, but did it semi-anonymously.
I want to pause just for a quick second, because I think we've probably explained it, but it is sort of difficult to explain. When you talk about his billing in this, like it was as if Paul Reubens didn't exist from 1985 to 1990, right? I mean, he has a Hollywood star. It is Pee-wee Herman, not Paul Reubens. And when you see the credits for, I think it's Big Adventure, I'm pretty sure it's Big Top Pee-wee, it is Pee-wee Herman as Pee-wee Herman. Nowhere does it say Paul Reubens. This is the part that is most Andy Kaufman-like, that he is all in on this character and is totally blurring the line of performance versus actual person. I didn't quite appreciate that he took it to that level.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I struggled here for my little Lebowski. I wanted a cameo. So he's in a couple of Cheech and Chong movies before Pee-wee Herman is really, the character he's playing everywhere. Do you remember next movie at all in the Howie Hamburger Dude and the whole I'm sorry scene?
I don't.
It's a little hard to set it up and explain it.
I don't remember any Cheech and Chong, like the actual content.
I'm not sure Cheech and Chong remember. I don't think anybody does.
That's not their job. That would ruin their brand if they remember
100%. So the plot setup is a little hard to explain, other than Pee-wee Herman's character is in an insane asylum with them, and he had stolen some money from them from some heist, and they had been committed. And there's a woman there with Paul Reubens saying, you need to say, I'm sorry. And so he's like, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And the way he does it is, I'll just play the clip.
I'm sorry! I'm sorry!
That's enough, Howie. That's enough, dear.
I'm
That's
awfully
just fine.
sorry.
That's fine. Now, boys, all the money is here. Come along, Howie.
Sorry.
And I just want to apologize to you again and tell you how sorry I am about the mistake. And if there's anything at all I can do for you, please don't hesitate to ask. Come along, Howie.
Sorry.
It's time for your lobotomy.
I'm sorry. I'm not sorry I took the money.
It sort of speaks to the kind of underground, weird cultiness origins of Paul Reubens and Pee-wee Herman, that he is in a couple of Cheech and Chong movies. Like, that's just so weird, It's like if you could go back 40 years and Phil Hartman and Paul Reubens are having a debate about whether or not this is a good idea to
take the Pee-wee solo show on the road.
Yeah, and inhabit the character so much that the only time you're ever Paul is when you're at home.
one of my closest friends at the Groundlings was Phil Hartman, and Phil was like tortured by that I was going to stop doing all my other characters. We argued about that all the time, and he would always go like, "You're totally wrong. That's wrong. You shouldn't do it that way." And I mean, we both had different paths and different careers. I mean, he got to be known for all those amazing characters he did. I have characters no one's ever seen, or people remember them from 150 years ago.
You know, was Phil Hartman right?
Yeah, I think so.
Was
it's
he?
just work. Yes.
I don't know. I kind of think Paul Reubens is right. I kind of think the more interesting story is the Paul Reubens playing Pee-wee Herman for many decades story, rather than you didn't get to do the things you could have done creatively. I don't know.
I see what you're saying.
Do you see the
that's
question
not
I'm
how I
trying
took
to
the
pose?
point. Yeah, I was taking it more on the level of, are you right to just have a work self and a personal self? Which I think when you deal with fame and acting, which is what he successfully did, is he got to just keep his personal self away from it, even when he went on Letterman and Leno and all of that.
But I think he's in an interesting way pushing the boundaries and saying that's not just what I'm doing, that I'm trying to do something else and I don't even know what it is. It's instinctual and I'm following it. And I don't know that there's a statement here, but that it is pushing boundaries in a way of how we understand art and entertainment. Tragic deaths aside, who has the more enviable career? On some level, you'd say Phil Hartman because he was hilarious and got to do all these different things. On another hand, I kind of think that Pee-wee Herman's more interesting.
Oh, yeah, totally. But it's, that was the path, Michael. It really wasn't that long. From the launch of the movie to the end of the TV show was 6 years. There were only 45 episodes of Pee-wee's Playhouse. It wasn't that long. The plan, I think, was for him to expand those creative boundaries and be a more serious actor. He just had this really unfortunately timed incident that came at the end of Pee-wee's Playhouse. Back when he was ready, he had left Pee-wee's Playhouse. Sometimes people get the chronology wrong, thinking that Pee-wee's Playhouse got canceled because of his incident and his arrest.
Right.
But no, he had actually left or taken a break from it because he was burned out and ready to kind of creatively refresh. He just no longer got that opportunity because of the media exposure of that arrest and the way that it was.
Well, and that's the thing that needs to be said is that, the fact that there was something sexual about it and that he was entertaining children just made everybody uncomfortable. Not to mention the fact that people were probably in this very homophobic era questioning his sexuality.
Yeah,
right?
it was a career killer in many ways, and no one can come to the defense of something like that.
With deep irony, too. Like, if he is performing the role of Pee-wee Herman for most of the 80s, you say 6 years, I'd go further back. I'd say from 1981.
No, he totally was. I'm just saying in the mega spotlight.
Yeah, in the heyday, sure. And that we knew so little about the real man, and this is the only bit of information we get about the real man, allows people to fill in the blanks in a lot of different complicated places. I mean, he even said in an interview that the news about the indecent exposure charge broke the same day or weekend as the Jeffrey Dahmer story, and he displaced it. Like the Pee-wee Herman scandal or the Paul Reubens scandal was more important to readers of the newspapers than Jeffrey Dahmer. What does that say?
Yes. And it's so hard to take a contrarian position to it because of his position, but I think we can at least agree he's not a predator.
Yeah, I think that is very clear. And there is that second charge that comes up. The more I looked at that, the more I thought there is nothing to this. But I guess it should be acknowledged that there was a allegation that he had obscene material that all got dismissed and scheduled down to a misdemeanor. But it also was one thing that's even about the indecent exposure story. He claims that there actually was no indecent exposure. He maintains his innocence, and he was ready to testify about it. And then,
didn't want the media circus.
Exactly. At some point, he's like, "Just give me the bill. Let's make this go away." And he could never make it go away. And here we are talking about it. Okay, let's pause again. Category 6, words to live by. In this category, we choose a quote. These are either words that came out of this person's mouth or that were said about them that resonated in a certain way.
I think you go. I've gone first the last several categories, I think.
Okay, so I was going to say, shh, I'm listening to reason, because I love that quote. I'm going to go with this one. I've always felt like a kid, and I still feel like a kid, and I've never had any problem tapping into my childhood and my kid side. Something that did not make my 5 things I love about you list, his childhood sensibilities. What are the values that Pee-wee's Playhouse communicates? It's distraction, it's playfulness, and it's sort of small stories in the corner of the room. My daughter has been going through a phase where she will take inanimate objects and create a whole little story. And when we're cleaning up the house at the end of the night after the kids are in bed, I'll find these little scenes in the corner of the room where she's been acting out some story in her mind with inanimate objects. When I clean these up and I put the toys back in their proper place and clean up the area, I have this moment of deep gratitude that, like, man, I forgot what it's like to be a kid. I forgot what it's like to just freeform tell stories. And it's a quality we lose with adulthood. It's a creativity that gets suppressed, that every now and then an artist comes along who reminds us how important and joyful it can be. I talked about this with Maurice Sendak. I think that there's something to this with Bill Watterson and Calvin and Hobbes, the way he is able to articulate the mind of a 6-7-year-old boy is masterful. And the way Pee-wee has this like not bad. Thank you. Like impulse to laugh and just like, let's play with this for a minute. Okay, that's done. Let's do the next thing. Oh no, check this out. And there's a quality in him, I don't want to get too corny, but inner child, right? And I think it is an important thing for us to acknowledge that under this layer of adult psychology is an inner child, and that child needs a channel and needs expression. Paul Reubens reminds me of that. Pee-wee Herman brings that out. And in my view, those are words to live by.
That's great.
Okay. What do you got?
Mine is also a little similar. Doing something for someone else will make me feel good. So the context of this is a conversation that Pee-wee was having with Cowboy Curtis in one episode of the Playhouse. And Cowboy Curtis's boots, he comes in from working out in the ranch, wherever the ranch might be beyond the Playhouse.
Right.
His boots are all mangled, so he needs new boots. And so he says, I wish I had a new pair of boots. And that lights up the genie within the Playhouse who can grant one wish per episode. The genie says, oh, did somebody say wish? And Pee-wee said, oh yeah, can I give my wish to Cowboy Curtis for his boots? The genie says, well, Pee-wee, are you sure you only have one wish? And that's when Pee-wee responds with this quote of doing something for someone else will make me feel good. So simple. Yeah. But part of the theme of Pee-wee's Playhouse, especially I think in these academic articles that you talk about, is the theme of reciprocity.
Yeah.
Is one thing that it was doing in teaching children that was not necessarily being taught throughout other Saturday morning programming. Have you ever read The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama?
Passages. I haven't sat down and done a cover to cover.
So you can pretty much summarize it in this sentence. Do things for others, right? Yeah. It's one core tenet of most religions.
Oh, it's one of the core tenets of the 12 steps. Salvation comes from being a helpful person. Relief comes from being a helpful person. And I love what you said about reciprocity, because that's the core of friendship.
Well, I think it's validation and self-worth and maybe even joy.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. It's probably the fastest route to joy, if not serenity,
Yeah. So I love that those words came out of Paul Reubens, a.k.a. Pee-wee Herman's mouth.
Okay. Good words to live by. All right. Category 7. Man in the mirror. This category is fairly simple. Did this person like their reflection, yes or no? This is not about beauty, but rather a question of self-confidence versus self-judgment. Whew, it's a tough one, Amit. Normally, I make up my mind and write something down ahead of time. I have a lean, and I'm going to hold it back. I want to hear your arguments.
So first of all, I want to say that it was acknowledged. He was asked if he looked in the mirror. And despite how much he does in the movie of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, remember that scene where he tapes his nose?
Yeah, with the Scotch tape.
Yes. But he was asked in an interview and he said, no, I don't look in the mirror. He's like, how can I? Because I'll be like, I'll see a grown man playing a child and I'll be like, oh my God. But there was a bit of a joking answer. There were other things though that I saw. So he said many times that he found his calling and how lucky and grateful he was for finding his calling.
Yes.
Like he really, really loved this character. And so to the extent that it is this special type of alter ego that we talk about, I see that as a lot of evidence of self-love. You talked about resilience, right? And he was. I mean, it was very, very tough for him after that scandal, but he did ultimately find his way out. And not too long later, he was back out there.
I mean, there's the famous MTV Music Awards. Hard to get jokes lately, but that
was less than a year after.
Oh, yeah. That was like weeks after the scandal. And then that was the last time we saw Pee-wee for many years. I think there was many years of depression. I think that there was many years of seclusion and isolation, and he slowly tried to wade the waters back into getting roles and was able to land some parts here and there. But I think it was always hard for him to venture out for most of the rest of his life, really up until the last few years.
Yeah. So I saw Resilience, and I saw him repeatedly say that he found his calling, which to me is an act of self-gratitude
and self-acceptance. So this is a yes. You're a yes for the man in the mirror?
I'm a yes for Paul Reubens.
Okay. I'm also going to go yes, but it's a lot more on the fence because it's clear that there is some self-confidence and self-acceptance. It's also clear that there is shame. But I do think that the shame originates more from the world's reaction to him, not because of a gross mistake. I mean, it was a gross mistake, but this is an overreaction, right? Like, this is one of the worst things that could happen, but it's also very forgivable. So I'm going yes for Man in the Mirror, too.
Good. Great.
Category 8, coffee, cocktail, or cannabis. In this category, we ask which one would we most want to do with our dead celebrity. This may be a question of what drug sounds like the most fun to partake with this person, or another philosophy is that a particular kind of drug might allow access to a part of them we are most curious about.
I'll go. I want to because I cheated.
Okay.
Because I'm going both. I want a cocktail front with weed back. So I'll explain myself. So the cocktails, one, he is a good hang.
Yeah.
Like if you listen to him on these interview shows, especially when he's with his pals, if he's with somebody like Conan O'Brien or Chris Hardwick, he is sharp, he is quick, he is funny.
Great storyteller. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's this arc of his career that he touched so many different lives and so many different institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a ton to talk about, and he's just funny the way he talks about it.
Yeah. And there's a nice combination of proud of his work and humility. He's aware of how interesting and how bizarre the whole thing is. There's a lot of self-awareness.
Totally. And he comes across as the type of guy you kind of want to hang out with.
So you want to get high and drunk with him?
No. Yeah. That's when we're going to get drunk. And then, maybe later in the night, then we'll get a little high. And then that's when I just want the quirky Pee-wee side to come out because I just want to be goofy. The same way I wanted to dance with Tina Turner. Like this guy just brings out the goof with you. When I was watching Playhouse like 2 nights ago, I felt goofy just watching it.
Yeah.
And so I think just being around him, whether it's in character or costume, it probably does need to be at least on a set. I want him to bring that sort of childlike energy and fun and vibrancy out of me.
Yeah.
And it would just be a really interesting experience to have all of the visual sensation. And really, I just want to get the giggles with him, and that's a way to do it.
I was very tempted to go in that direction as well. I had an experience when I was 17 years old on acid, on LSD, where I hung out with my friend, and we spent what felt like
17.
45 minutes. Yeah, I was pretty young. I got into drugs pretty young. We were on the front porch of a buddy's house, just making faces, like taking our hands and like going, whoa, and like, and giggling. Because, psychedelics will take you back to that childlike state. And I would love to have a similar experience with Paul Reubens. I actually went with coffee. I don't need to him to dissect or walk me through the trauma and shame and all the other complicated emotions that would have come post-scandal. I don't think there's anything I need to learn that he didn't already say in other places. And I have something on that in a moment. What I am really interested in, actually, is having a really rich inventory list of his points of inspiration. All of the little bits of art that influenced him, that led him to a life in the arts as an actor, as a comedic actor, then as Pee-wee Herman, in some of these cameo kind of roles, he's great in everything he's in. This guy could have had a character actor career, in another universe. I like people who draw inspiration from really, really eclectic, unexpected sources. I'd love to just sit down and learn from him what influenced you and what was it about that thing that made you want to incorporate it into Pee-wee's Playhouse and the Pee-wee persona overall. There's a really rich tapestry in the background. And it's a reminder to me of how vast the template for creative inspiration can be. There's so much to work with out there, and you can find it in the funniest, most unlikely corners of entertainment history.
Yeah.
So I want a cup of coffee, and I kind of just want to hang out and wander around the house,
Yeah. So part of your coffee is similar to my first half of getting sloshed.
Very much, yes. We really covered the gamut because you went 2 and I went 1.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Final category, the Vanderbeek, named after James Vanderbeek, who famously said in Varsity Blues,
I don't want your life.
In that Varsity Blues scene, James makes a judgment that he does not want a certain kind of life based on a single characteristic or a single story. So here, Amit and I will form a rebuttal to anyone skeptical of how Paul Reubens lived his life.
So the word single that you use in that description is really apt here.
Yeah, that's
right?
what I was
Because
thinking
we talk about a single character and we talk about sort of a single defining moment that altered the course of a career.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a lot about the Bill Buckner episode leading up to this, in that there is a one-off incident that changes the narrative arc of a life story. This one is different. I mean, and for a lot of reasons. You know, this life story certainly made me grapple with the question of personal inner life and public narrative, and how to find inner peace when the narrative about you is so, in some places, just flat out wrong, but also overbearing and overwhelming. That is, without question, the obvious counter argument for why you would not want this life.
Yeah.
I think if you wanted to add a, 1B, you could make the case that, like, it is a little bit different, rebellious, that there is no life partner and we don't know much about his love life overall. There is a question that you kind of can't help but ask, was part of him repressed in some fundamental way?
Yeah, you worry about that.
You worry about that. Somebody who builds a career entertaining children with this very childlike character, you sort of almost presume something must be repressed, which is part of the reason the scandal had such legs. Those are not insignificant counter arguments.
Yeah, 1A and 1B. And I think 2 is the singular association of the alter ego.
Yeah.
If that wasn't already covered.
Although that one is more complicated, because I think that ultimately, on balance, in his final days, I bet he was like, I'm really glad I created Pee-wee.
Totally. Yeah.
For all the challenge that it sort of locked into on and off stage, this was a great creative contribution to the stream of life. So
I think you've already segued into the case, the rebuttal.
Yeah.
And it is that.
I think that's number one.
The contribution into the stream of life
is unbelievable.
It is unbelievable and appreciated on a much different level the more time goes on.
Yeah.
From it.
I like it as a historical artifact, too. I like the idea that if people want to go back and understand the 1980s, Pee-wee Herman will be the character that maybe unlocks the subcultures and cultures of that generation. I've got another thing I'd like to add to this. I actually copied a quote from a Playboy article that was written in the 2010s. I think it was before the Judd Apatow Pee-wee movie came out, but towards the last 10 years of his life. The interviewer asked, after everything you've been through, all the bumps, plunges, horrors, what do you think you've become? And he says this, at this point, the most interesting comment I could make to you is that I have no regrets. I really don't. Everything happened for a reason, with insight and knowledge and growth involved. It is a journey, and I will not accept a shitty ending. I spent a lot of time trying to imagine what in the fuck I was being prepared for. What exactly am I being tested for? And I don't know the answer to that right now, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to be ready. Whatever that is, I'm going to be really powerful. I mean, if I'm not careful, I could turn into Gandhi. I could be like a superpower. I don't mean that in any weird way, but somebody is going to be really impressed, I think, in addition to me. I won't be surprised, but I will be impressed. This has all been too powerful and weird to just be a schnooky comedian's path. I loved this quote. I reread it several times.
Yeah, I came across it as well.
Surrender. You know, I mean, not to bring up too much 12-step stuff, but this is a step 3, like acceptance and surrender of this is who I am and there is a plan for me and it is confusing and I don't know what I'm being tested for. And I really love that he says, I don't know the answer to that right now, but it doesn't matter. I mean, this speaks to the resiliency and this speaks to the deep humanity of the guy that I wanted to be there before you and I committed to doing this episode and that I found. Man. He even talks about the journey and the process here. I mean, this is what it's all about. Talks about frickin' Gandhi, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah. I pulled a similar quote from Vanity Fair, not quite as deep as that one, but he said, beauty and art and sensitivity is what I hope for and strive for, and I hope people notice. I think it's just kind of a little bit of a truncated version of that.
Yeah.
Especially the sensitivity.
Yeah.
And then the thing I pointed to a few segments back was that he repeatedly said over and over again, he found his calling.
Yeah.
I mean, not that many people can go through life and say that they truly found their calling.
Yeah.
And that is huge.
Yeah.
I think that is huge.
God, is there anything you can be more grateful that than that feeling, whether you're right or wrong about
I don't think so.
About a calling, right?
Yeah. And then if we're just going to couch it on one point, it's just how much he was loved. And if I would just want to isolate a point, like when Conan aired an episode after Paul died, like I think that's the most emotional I've ever heard Conan.
Well, I remember when he died last year being really taken aback by the outpouring. And you and I have a certain attention to celebrity deaths.
Yeah.
I remember feeling way more moved than normal when he passed away. And
totally,
I've been wanting to have this conversation. And I'm really glad we've done a Pee-wee Herman, Paul Reubens episode, because I needed to be reminded of all of this. So should we recap the argument to James Vanderbeek?
Yes.
Okay. So number one, the contribution of Pee-wee Herman. I also went with resilience, self-acceptance, born out of surrender.
I added he found his calling and how revered and loved he was.
So that's a lot. And James Vanderbeek, I'm Paul Reubens, and you might want my life. Speed round. Amit, what episode from our archives would you like to plug here?
I have to go Bob Einstein, Super Funkhouser, just because of the alter ego. Bob Einstein played Super Dave Osborne for decades, appeared on TV shows as the character. Very similar to the path that the early Pee-wee played.
I am going to go Maurice Sendak.
Oh, nice one.
Thank you. That's a personal favorite of mine, Wild Thing. If there's somebody out there who also understands childhood sensibilities in an interesting and boundary-pushing way, it is Maurice Sendak. All right, here's a little teaser for the next episode of Famous and Gravy. He was a knowledgeable interviewer who focused on craft while avoiding gossip.
From 60 Minutes. It's got to be somebody from 60 Minutes.
Famous and Gravy listeners, we love hearing from you. If you want to reach out with a comment, question, or to participate in our opening quiz, email us at hello@famousandgravy.com. In our show notes, we include all kinds of links, including to our website and our social channels. Famous and Gravy is created and co-hosted by me, Michael Osborne, and Amit Kapoor. This episode was produced by Megan Palmer, original music by Kevin Strang. See you next time. Follow Famous and Gravy on the Wondery app. You can listen to more episodes early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at Wondery.com/survey.